Get off the comms, Stray. You're clogging the net. The roar of the 7.62mm rounds chewing through the mud brick wall drowned out the static. Lieutenant Commander Miller, call sign Viper, was bleeding out, his leg a ruin of tourniquets and torn Kevlar. That left Chief Knox in command. And Knox was panicking. "We are combat ineffective. I repeat, Echo 2 is fixed." Knox screamed into the handset, his voice cracking. "Viper is down. We need immediate extract at Grid Sierra Tango." Ilara Vance sat huddled in the corner of the decimated courtyard. No armor, just a standard-issue sidearm she hadn't drawn. She watched the dust fall from the ceiling, counting the seconds between the enemy mortar impacts. Short, long, bracketed. "They aren't listening, Chief," Ilara said. Her voice was eerily flat, cutting through the chaos like a razor. "And if you stay in this kill box for another 30 seconds, that mortar team will correct their azimuth. You'll all be dead." Knox spun around, wild-eyed. He shoved past a medic looming over her. "I told you to shut up. You're a glorified librarian. Stay out of my sight, Stray." He turned back to the radio. Ilara didn't flinch. She checked her watch. 22 seconds. "Knox," she said, looking at the blood pooling near his boots. "The flanking maneuver they're using? It's a textbook L-shaped ambush modified for urban terrain. Page 142, subsection C." "What the hell are you talking about?" "I wrote it," she whispered, standing up. "Now hand me the radio, or your men die in 19 seconds. Transmission ends. The briefing room at Bagram Airfield smelled of stale coffee, CLP gun oil, and the aggressive, pressurized pheromones of men who killed for a living. Ilara Vance stood near the door, her back pressed against the cold, cinder-block wall. She wore distinctively ill-fitting multicam fatigues, devoid of patches, rank, or flags. To the 12 men of Echo Platoon, sitting in the tiered rows of cheap plastic chairs, she was a void, a blurred pixel in their high-definition war. "All right, listen up." Lieutenant Commander Miller, call sign Viper, slapped a laser pointer against the projected map on the whiteboard. "Target is a KH-11 satellite recon pod. It went down in the Wakhan corridor 3 hours ago. The bird is trashed, but the hard drive is intact. We get in, we secure the drive, we demo the bird, we get out. Oscar Mike in 60 mics." Viper was a good officer, Ilara noted. Efficient. By the book. But he was tired. She could see the micro-tremors in his hand, holding the pointer. "What about the cargo?" A voice rumbled from the front row. Master Chief Petty Officer Elias Knox leaned back, his chair creaking under the sheer density of his muscle mass. He jerked a thumb over his shoulder, pointing blindly at Ilara without looking at her. "Command says the Stray comes with us," Viper said, his tone clipping the end of the sentence to minimize the annoyance. "Ms. Vance is the cultural specialist. If we run into locals, she talks. We don't." Knox snorted. "Cultural specialist. Right. Just what we need. A babysitter for the goat herders while we're trying to move heavy." He finally turned, his eyes scanning Ilara with a predatory dismissal. He didn't see the calluses on her hands or the way she stood with her weight perfectly balanced on the balls of her feet. He saw a woman in her late 40s, gray streaking her messy bun, eyes tired behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Hey, Stray, you know how to fast rope? Or do I need to strap you to my chest like a baby carrier?" Laughter rippled through the room. Low, guttural, bonding laughter. "I am certified for static line and hey-ho, Chief," Ilara said. Her voice was soft, barely carrying over the hum of the air conditioning unit. "Sure you are," Knox muttered, standing up. The briefing was over. The room exploded into kinetic energy as the operators grabbed gear bags and helmets. Ilara moved toward the exit, intending to head for the staging area. The aisle was narrow. Knox was moving towards her, a chaotic mass of plate carrier and suppressed carbine. He had plenty of room to pass on her left. He chose the center. He slammed his shoulder into hers. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. You exist in my space only because I let you. The impact was solid. Ilara absorbed it, rolling her shoulder slightly to dissipate the force so she wouldn't stumble. It was a reflex she hadn't used in a decade. Knox didn't even look back. He just kept walking, checking the optic on his rifle. "Watch your steps, Stray," he called out over his shoulder. "Dangerous world out there." Ilara paused, adjusting her glasses. She watched him walk away. She watched the way his drop-leg holster was rigged, too low on the thigh. It would impede his sprint if they took contact from the rear. She looked at the rest of them. Young, strong, invincible. She had written the Standard Operating Procedure, SOP, for the MK-18 carbine integration they were all carrying. She had drafted the risk assessment matrix Viper had just glossed over. She knew that the Wakhan corridor wasn't just mountainous. It was an acoustic nightmare where radio waves died and ambush noises amplified. She opened her mouth to tell Knox that his secondary comms line was routed through a jam-prone frequency, a mistake she had corrected in the 2014 revision of the Naval Special Warfare Signals Manual. She closed her mouth. "Let them learn," a dark voice whispered in her head. "They don't want your help. They want your silence." "Ms. Vance?" Viper was at the door holding it open, looking at her with a mix of pity and impatience. "Transport is leaving." "Coming, Commander," Ilara said. She picked up her kit bag. It was lighter than theirs, but the burden inside it felt heavier. She walked out into the blinding Afghan sun, following the men who thought she was nothing, into a valley that would demand she be everything. She checked her wrist altimeter. Calibrated, she checked her pulse. 54 beats per minute. Ice, she thought. Be ice. "Load up," Knox yelled from the back of the Chinook. "Stray, get in the back. Try not to vomit on my boots." The interior of the C-130 Hercules was a red-lit cavern of vibrating metal and recycled air. It was freezing, a biting, sterile cold that seeped through the layers of thermal gear. Ilara sat on the nylon bench seat, a plastic oxygen mask clamped over her face, pre-breathing 100% oxygen to purge the nitrogen from her blood. Beside her, Petty Officer Soto, the team's youngest operator, checked the carabiners connecting his harness to hers for the third time in 5 minutes. He was her tandem master. He was 24 years old, built like a linebacker, and he was vibrating with adrenaline. "You good back there, ma'am?" Soto's voice crackled in her earpiece, tinny and overly loud. "Just remember, when the light goes green, you go limp. Don't try to fight the air. I steer, you ride. Got it?" Ilara tapped her mic twice. Copy. She didn't say that she had logged more high-altitude jumps in the late 90s than Soto had years on Earth. She didn't mention that going limp at terminal velocity was a great way to induce a spin if the drogue chute fouled. She just sat there, her hands resting loosely on her reserve handle, eyes closed behind her goggles. 1 minute! The jumpmaster's voice boomed over the internal loop. The rear ramp began to lower. The red light bathed the bay in a sinister crimson glow, which was instantly swallowed by the roaring maw of the night sky. The noise changed from a mechanical hum to a violent, wind-torn scream. Chief Knox stood near the edge of the ramp, his silhouette framed by the abyss. He looked back at Alara and Soto, flashing a thumbs up that felt more like a warning than a reassurance. Don't screw this up. Alara checked her wrist altimeter. 25,000 feet. The air outside would be 30 degrees below zero. Stand up! The command jerked the platoon into motion. Soto hauled Alara to her feet. The weight of the equipment was crushing. Her ruck, his ruck, the weapon systems, and the oxygen console. They shuffled toward the edge, a clumsy, four-legged beast. Alara looked past Nox's helmet into the darkness. There were no ground lights. The Wakan corridor was a black void of jagged peaks and glacial valleys. "Check winds!" the jumpmaster shouted, throwing a streamer out the back. He watched it whip away into the darkness. "Winds are 10 knots south-southwest. Green light! Green light! Go! Go! Go!" Nox vanished. Then Viper. Then the rest of the stack, disappearing into the void like stones dropped in a well. Soto shuffled them to the edge. He hesitated, a fraction of a second, a micro flinch. "Go," Alara commanded silently. They tipped forward. Gravity snatched them. The sensation of falling was instantaneous and violent. The slipstream hammered against Alara's body, a physical weight trying to tear her apart. They stabilized quickly, belly to earth, the drogue chute deploying with a sharp thwack to keep them upright. Silence descended as they hit terminal velocity. The roar of the plane faded, replaced by the rushing wind. Alara watched the altimeter on Soto's wrist, visible just over her shoulder. 18,000 feet. 17,000. She scanned the horizon. Her night vision goggles, NVGs, painted the world in grainy green phosphorescence. To her left, she saw the glow tape of the other jumpers, a tight formation tracking toward the primary drop zone, DZ, in the valley floor. Then she felt it. A shudder. A lateral shift in the air pressure. It wasn't a gust. It was a shear. The wind had shifted. Not south-southwest. It was coming hard from the west, banking off the mountain face. They were drifting. Fast. She looked at the formation. They were tracking true to the plan, but the air was lying to them. If they opened at the planned altitude of 4,000 feet AGL, above ground level, the crosswind would push them 2 clicks east, right into the jagged teeth of the ridgeline, not the valley floor. Soto didn't correct. He was locked onto Nox's strobe, following the leader. Blind obedience. Alara's heart rate spiked. Correction needed. Turn 30 degrees right. Crab into the wind. She waited. 12,000 feet. Soto remained steady. He hadn't felt the shift. He was trusting the pre-mission brief over the reality of the air. Alara reached up. It was strictly forbidden for the passenger to touch the controls. It was dangerous. It could cause a lockout. But if they didn't turn now, they would smash into the granite face of the mountain at 50 miles per hour. She grabbed Soto's right wrist, the one controlling the toggle, and squeezed. Hard. A specific rhythmic pulse used by jump masters to signal a drift correction. Soto jerked his arm away, his voice frantic in her ear. "Stop! Hands off! What are you doing?" He fought her. He corrected left, back toward Nox, compounding the error. Idiot, she thought. The terrifying calm of the operator took over. She didn't argue. She shifted her body weight violently to the right, dropping her right shoulder and knee. The aerodynamics of the tandem pair responded instantly. The shift forced Soto into a right turn, fighting his inputs. "Stop moving!" Soto screamed. "Look at your GPS!" Alara yelled into the mask, breaking radio silence. "Look at the drift! We are 2 clicks off! Turn right!" Soto froze. For a second he checked the wrist-mounted GPS. The little arrow was crabbing sideways, drifting rapidly toward the red contour lines of the mountain. He saw it. Panic flared. Then training kicked in. He hauled on the right toggle, turning them into the wind. It was too late for the rest of the team. Knox and the main stack were too low, committed to their line. Echo lead, this is Echo 5, Soto stammered. Winds have shifted. You are drifting east. Correction, you are drifting east. Static. No reply. The mountains were blocking the signal. Pull, Alara said. Pull now. Soto pulled the ripcord. The main chute deployed with a bone-jarring snap, wrenching them from freefall into the slow, swaying descent. Alara looked down. Below them, the darkness was absolute. But to their left, she saw the faint, flickering IR strobes of Echo Platoon. They weren't in the valley. They were scattered across the scree slopes of the eastern ridge, miles from the target. They were separated. The mission had gone foobar before boots even touched the ground. Soto steered them toward a small plateau, breathing hard. Jesus, I didn't feel it. I didn't feel the shift. Alara didn't answer. She was already scanning the ground, looking for heat signatures. She unclipped her sidearm, checking the slide in the dark. They hit the ground hard. Alara performed a perfect PLF, parachute landing fall, rolling through the impact to absorb the shock. Soto stumbled, tangled in the risers, cursing. Alara was up instantly. She cut away the harness connecting her to him, stepping free. She stood in the freezing wind, the silence of the Hindu Kush pressing in on them. "Pack your chute," she whispered, her voice devoid of fear. "We have a 3-mile hike to the others, and we are not alone." Soto looked at her, eyes wide in the green glow of the night vision. He looked at the woman he had been told to babysit. "How did you know?" he whispered. "About the wind?" Alara adjusted her pack, turning her back to him to hide the shake in her hands. Not from fear, but from the rage of knowing exactly what mistake came next. "I read a lot," she said. "Move." The hike to the rally point was a lung-burning ascent through loose scree and razor-edged shale. At 12,000 feet, the air was thin enough to make even the fittest operator gasp, but Alara kept her breathing rhythmic. In for 2, out for 2. Control the hypoxia. Don't let the panic set in. Soto moved ahead of her, checking his GPS every 50 meters. He was moving fast, trying to make up for the jump error, his boots crunching loudly on the frost-hardened gravel. Too loudly. "Soto," Alara whispered, the sound barely escaping her lips. "Lift your feet, roll the tread. You sound like a rock slide." Soto slowed, looking back at her with the white eyes of his NVGs. He didn't argue. He just adjusted his gait. They found the rest of Echo Platoon huddled in a depression between 2 granite boulders, the objective rally point, ORP. The team was a cluster of dark shapes, visible only by the faint, pulsing, rhythmic flash of their IR strobes, invisible to the naked eye, but blinding under night vision. Chief Knox was there instantly, looming out of the dark like a monolithic shadow. He grabbed Soto by the shoulder strap, pulling him in close. "You're late," Knox hissed. 20 mics late. We are burning daylight we don't have." "Wind shear, Chief," Soto stammered. "The stray, Ms. Vance, she called it. We had to adjust." Knox turned his gaze to Alara. She was leaning against a rock, checking the seal on her water bladder. She didn't look winded, though her legs were burning with lactic acid. "We move now," Knox said, his voice a low growl over the comms loop. "Viper wants to make up time. That means we double time to the target building. If you fall behind, Vance, we leave you. I'm not losing a satellite because you skipped cardio." "Understood," Alara replied. Her voice was flat, devoid of ego. "What is the formation?" "You're in the rear. Stay 10 meters behind the medic. Do not engage unless engaged. Do not speak unless spoken to. The platoon moved out. It was a ranger file, a long, spaced-out line winding through the narrow defile of the valley floor. The silence was absolute, save for the soft rustle of nylon and the crunch of boots. The world through Ilara's PVS-31 goggles was a monochromatic tunnel of green phosphor. She watched the team move. They were good, fluid, aggressive, but they were rushing. The delay had made them impatient. They approached a narrow choke point where the valley walls squeezed in, forcing the path around a massive outcrop of fallen slate. It was a classic ambush point. Ilara's skin prickled. She scanned the high ground. Nothing. Davis, the point man, took a knee, scanning the sector. He signaled clear. He stood up and began to move around the outcrop. Ilara stopped. She saw it. Not a wire, not a glint. It was a shadow. A disruption in the dust pattern on the rock face to the right, waist height. It was a dust-disturbed indicator. Something had been taped there and removed, or... No. Something was embedded there. Davis took a step. His boot was inches from a tension line painted to look like a vein of quartz in the rock. Ilara couldn't shout. Sound traveled too far in the canyon. A shout would alert any sentries. She brought her hand to her mouth and made a sound. A sharp, wet cough. Not loud enough to echo, but distinct enough to break the rhythm of the silence. Cough. Davis froze mid-step. It was instinctive. A noise behind you meant stop. Knox whipped around, his rifle raising. Movement. He whispered over the internal net. Vance cut the noise. Davis, Ilara said, her voice a ghost over the radio. Don't put your foot down. The point man hovered, his boot hovering 6 inches above the gravel. Say again. Look at the rock face. 3 o'clock, knee level, the quartz vein. Davis turned his head slowly. He switched his NVGs to close focus. He saw it. A monofilament line, thinner than a hair, running across the path, painted with a matte finish to blend into the stone. It ran from the rock face to a buried charge on the left side of the trail. Holy, Davis breathed. I have a tripwire. Tension release. The squad went static, every muscle locked. Knox moved up, sliding past the line, his movements suddenly precise and careful. He inspected the device buried in the dirt. He brushed away a layer of shale. EOD up, Knox whispered. I'm looking at a daisy chain. If Davis had tripped that, it would have blown the cliff face. We'd be buried. The explosive ordnance disposal tech moved up, working in the green silence. Ilara stayed in the back, scanning the rear. She felt the eyes of the medic on her. Clear, the EOD tech said after 2 agonizing minutes. It's disarmed, but Chief, you need to see this. Knox looked at the device the tech held up. It wasn't a pressure cooker bomb. It wasn't a rusted Soviet artillery shell rigged with a cell phone. It was a directional fragmentation mine. Compact. Polymer-cased. What is it? Viper asked from the middle of the stack. Knox stared at the markings on the casing. Even in the dark, the laser-etched serial number was visible under IR illumination. It's American, Knox said, his voice tight. Manufactured 2018. Lot number matches the batch sent to the Peshmerga, or us. Ilara closed her eyes for a brief second. She knew the model. The M18A2 Claymore Plus. She had written the acquisition request for that specific lot during a black operation in Syria 3 years ago. They aren't just using our tactics, Ilara whispered to herself, too low for the mic to pick up. They're using our inventory. Move out, Knox ordered, but the arrogance was gone from his voice. Eyes open, watch the ground. Stray. Stay close. The satellite crash site was located in a shallow bowl at the base of the eastern ridge. From 500 meters out, it looked like a scar on the landscape, a streak of blackened earth ending in a tangled mess of titanium and solar panels. Echo 2 set up Overwatch. Viper's voice was a whisper in the earpiece. Echo 1 bounding. The team split. 6 men, including Knox and the heavy weapons gunner, moved up the scree slope to provide cover. Viper, Ilara, and the assault element began the approach. They moved in perfect synchronization, one element moving while the other covered, a lethal game of leapfrog called bounding Overwatch. Ilara stayed low, her knees scraping against the sharp rocks. She kept her eyes on the ridgeline above them, not the wreck. The silence was heavy, pressurized. It felt wrong. They reached the perimeter of the crash site. Viper signaled for a halt. "Clear right," Davis whispered. "Clear left." Viper moved into the wreckage. He knelt by the fuselage of the KH-11, shining his IR illuminator into the avionics bay. He froze. "Chief," Viper said, his voice tight. "It's gone." "Say again?" Knox replied from the ridge. "The drive housing. It's empty, and the bolts were removed. They weren't sheared off by the crash. Someone unscrewed them." Ilara moved closer, ignoring the glare of the operator nearest to her. She looked at the ground around the wreck. There were no footprints. The earth had been swept, literally swept with branches to hide the tread marks. "This site is sanitized," Ilara said, breaking her silence. "They didn't just take the drive, they cleaned the crime scene." "Contact front." The call came from the ridge. The air snapped. The crack of a supersonic round passing inches from Viper's head preceded the sound of the gunshot by a fraction of a second. Crack thump. Viper dove behind the twisted metal of the satellite engine. "Contact! Bearing 120, high ground!" The valley exploded, but it wasn't the chaotic, sporadic rattle of AK-47 fire typical of local insurgents. It was a rhythmic, tearing sound. Controlled bursts. Pop, pop, pop. Pause. Pop, pop, pop. Ilara hit the dirt, pressing her face into the gravel. Bullets walked a line across the fuselage above her, showering her with sparks and hot metal. She didn't fire. She listened. 2 machine guns were firing from the cliffs. They were alternating perfectly. As one gunner paused to reload or cool the barrel, the other picked up the slack instantly. It was a talking guns technique, designed to create an unbroken wall of lead. "Suppressing fire!" Knox roared over the comms. The SEALs on the ridge opened up with their MK-48s, the heavy belt-fed weapons chugging rhythmically. But the enemy fire didn't waver. They shifted. They knew exactly where the SEALs would set up their base of fire, and they were already bracketing the position. "They're shifting fire!" Ilara yelled, grabbing the ankle of the operator next to her. "Tell the ridge to move! They're getting flanked!" "Stay down, Stray!" the operator shouted, returning fire. Up on the ridge, the ground around Knox's team erupted. A mortar round landed 30 meters short, then 20 meters long. They were being bracketed. The third round would be a direct hit. "Echo 2, displace! Displace!" Viper screamed into the radio. The team on the ridge scrambled, abandoning their cover just as a 60-millimeter mortar shell slammed into the rock shelf they had occupied seconds before. Ilara watched the tracer fire arcing down from the darkness. It wasn't just suppressed fire. It was pinning fire. They were driving the SEALs into the depression of the crash site. "They are hurting us," Ilara realized. Her stomach turned over. "They aren't trying to kill us yet. They are pushing us into the kill zone." She recognized the cadence. The 3-second bursts. the way the enemy gunners overlapped their sectors of fire. It was Protocol Obsidian, Section 4, Paragraph 2. Combined arms suppression in non-permissive environments. She had written that paragraph in a safe house in Abbottabad in 2011. She had emphasized the psychological effect of continuous fire to break the enemy's OODA loop. Now, that psychology was being applied to them. "Viper, we are fixed," Knox yelled. "We can't get aggressive. They have the angles." The firing suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. The dust hung in the air, illuminated by the lasers cutting through the dark. "Check fire," Viper ordered, breathless. "Scan your sectors." The radio crackled, but it wasn't a SEAL frequency. It was a broad-spectrum transmission, breaking through their encrypted net with raw analog power. "Echo platoon," a voice said. It was calm, accented but fluent in English, deep, resonant. "Check your fire." The SEALs looked at each other. This was impossible. Their crypto keys were top secret. "Who is this?" Viper demanded. "You are sitting in a pre-registered mortar box, Lieutenant," the voice continued. "Reference point Alpha. I suggest you lower your weapons and tell the architect, tell Stray, that her chapter on escalation dominance needs a revision." Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. The team turned to look at her, their weapons lowering slightly, confusion replacing the aggression in their eyes. "He knows you," Knox said, his voice low and dangerous. "How the hell does he know you?" Ilara stared up at the black cliffs. "Because he's reading my book." The voice on the radio cut out with a sharp click, returning the valley to the mechanical scream of heavy weapons fire. The pause had been theater, a psychological break designed to let the fear settle before the physical violence resumed. Now the volume doubled. "Incoming! RPG!" The warning was cut short by a concussive thump. A rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the rock face 10 meters above them, showering the depression with razor-sharp shale. "Pop smoke! Pop smoke!" Viper roared, keying his radio. "All stations, break contact! Peel right! Peel right!" Viper stood up to throw a smoke grenade, his silhouette momentarily framed against the burning wreckage of the satellite. It was a mistake. A sniper, positioned high on the rim, had been waiting for the leader to expose himself. Thwack! The sound was distinct, wet and heavy, like a sledgehammer hitting a side of beef. Viper spun violently, his legs collapsing under him. He hit the dirt hard, clutching his thigh. "I'm hit! Femoral! I'm hit!" The scream tore through the disciplined chatter of the platoon. The command structure fractured instantly. "Man down! Viper is down!" The medic, a lanky operator named Doc Sanders, sprinted across the open ground, sliding into the dirt beside the lieutenant. Ilara watched from her prone position behind a boulder. She saw the blood, bright arterial red, pulsing in time with a dying heart, spraying onto the gray dust. Doc was already wrenching a cat tourniquet onto Viper's leg, cranking the windlass until the skin bunched and the screaming stopped, replaced by a guttural groan. "We can't stay." "Here!" Knox bellowed, sliding into the cover beside them. He grabbed Viper's vest, dragging him deeper into the shadow of the wreckage. Knox looked at the cliffs, his eyes wide, pupils dilated with the chemical cocktail of combat stress. "Doc, can he walk?" Knox demanded. "Negative. His femur is shattered. We need a litter." Knox looked around. The enemy fire was chewing up their cover. The satellite wreckage was disintegrating under the sustained barrage. They were being hammered against the anvil. "We have to move!" Knox shouted, his voice cracking with the weight of sudden command. "If we stay, we die." We need the ridgeline to the west. There's a ravine. It offers cover. Alara looked to the west. She saw the ravine Knox was pointing to. It was a narrow slash in the rock face, offering perfect defilade from the current enemy positions. It looked like salvation. It was a trap. No, Alara said. The word was lost in the roar of a machine gun burst. She crawled forward, grabbing Knox's harness. "Chief, do not go west!" Knox shoved her hand away. "Get off me! We are taking heavy fire. That ravine is the only cover." "It's a funnel!" Alara shouted, leaning into his face to be heard over the chaos. "Look at the terrain, Knox. They are suppressing us from the east and north. They are leaving the west open. They want you to go into that ravine." "It's high ground," Knox yelled back, saliva spraying. "It's the only way out." "It's a channelized kill zone." Alara's voice was desperate. She recited the text from memory, the words she had typed into a secure terminal at Dam Neck years ago. Force the enemy into a natural choke point by sealing off all other avenues of escape with overwhelming fire. If you go in there, they will seal both ends. It's a coffin. Knox hesitated. For a split second, the logic pierced the panic. He looked at the ravine again. Then he looked at Viper, who was gray-faced and going into shock. "I don't care what your book says," Knox snarled. "I care about getting my LT out of this kill box. We are moving! Echo platoon, on me! Deploy M18s! Cover smoke!" "Knox, don't! Move!" Canisters of red smoke hissed and popped, filling the depression with a thick, choking crimson fog, the world reduced to 5 feet of visibility. "Grab the LT!" Knox ordered. 2 operators grabbed Viper's drag handle. The team began to move, retreating blindly into the red haze, heading straight for the western ravine. Alara stood there for a second, frozen. The enemy fire had slackened. They were letting them move. They were letting the mouse run into the maze. She could stay here and die alone, or follow them into the trap she knew was waiting. She checked her magazine. Full. "Damn you," she whispered. She followed the team into the smoke, the smell of copper blood and burning phosphorus thick in her throat. As she crossed the threshold into the ravine, she felt the temperature drop. The walls rose up on either side, blocking out the sky. It was perfect. If she were the enemy commander, this is exactly where she would put the claymores. "Keep moving," Knox shouted from the front. "We're almost clear." Alara gripped her pistol. No, she thought. We are just getting started. The ravine was not a shelter. It was an amplifier. The moment the last man of Echo Platoon crossed the threshold into the rock cut, the trap snapped shut. It didn't start with gunfire. It started with light. 4 parachute flares popped overhead, sizzling as they drifted down, bathing the narrow gorge in a stark, flickering daylight. The shadows vanished. The seals were illuminated like actors on a stage, frozen in the glare. Then the walls erupted. "Ambush! High ground! Both sides!" The scream was drowned out by the deluge of fire. This wasn't the controlled suppression of the earlier engagement. This was annihilation fire. Heavy machine guns positioned on the rims of the canyon poured lead down into the defilade at a 45-degree angle. Alara threw herself into a crevice at the base of the wall, curling into a ball as rock shards and sparks rained down on her. The noise was physical, a hammer beating against her chest. The acoustics of the ravine trapped the shock waves, compounding the overpressure of every bullet crack. "Return fire! Echo 1, lay down hate!" Knox roared, his voice barely audible over the din. He was firing wildly at the rim, his brass casing ejecting in a golden arc. But the angle was wrong. The seals had to shoot almost straight up, exposing themselves to aim, while the enemy could fire down with impunity. "Doc, get Viper behind the slate!" Knox grabbed the medic by the vest, hauling him and the unconscious lieutenant into the only real cover, a slab of fallen granite. Thump, thump, thump. Ilara's blood ran cold. She knew that sound. It wasn't the machine guns. It was the soft, pneumatic cough of a 60mm commando mortar being fired in handheld mode. "Mortars!" she screamed, though no one heard her. The first round impacted 20 meters down the ravine, near the rear guard. The explosion was contained by the walls, focusing the blast wave like a piston. 2 SEALs were thrown against the rock face like ragdolls. Bracketed, Ilara thought, her mind detaching from the terror to analyze the geometry. They fired long. Now they will fire short, then they will split the difference. The second round hit the entrance of the ravine, sealing their retreat. They were boxed in. Knox scrambled over to the radio operator, who was huddled against the wall, frantically keying the handset. "Get me air! I need a standard chaos request! Danger close! Tell them we are taking effective fire!" Knox yelled. The RTO shook his head, his face pale under the grime. "I can't, Chief. The net is dead. It's just white noise. They're jamming everything." "Switch to SATCOM." "I tried. It's wide spectrum jamming, Chief. We are black on comms. We are alone." Knox stared at the handset, the realization crashing down on him heavier than the mortar rounds. He had led them here. He had ignored the warning. He had marched his men into a pre-registered kill box because he didn't want to listen to a librarian. A third mortar round whistled in, landing in the center of the squad's position. The blast was deafening. Dust and smoke swallowed the ravine. Ilara coughed, tasting the acrid bitterness of high explosives. She looked at the carnage. The team was combat ineffective. They were pinned, blinded, and deafened. She closed her eyes for a second, and in the darkness behind her lids, she saw the pages of a document. Field Manual 30511, Appendix D, Linear Ambushes in Restrictive Terrain. The objective is not to assault the kill zone, but to fix the target with indirect fire while maneuvering a cut-off force to the exit. She had written those words. She had diagrammed this exact scenario on a whiteboard in Virginia. She had taught a generation of foreign internal defense forces how to execute this maneuver to negate American air superiority. "I did this," she thought. The guilt was a cold knife in her gut. "I taught them how to kill us." She looked at Knox. The giant Master Chief was slumped against the rock, changing a magazine with trembling hands. He looked lost. The arrogance had been stripped away, leaving only the terrified realization that he was out of options. Ilara looked down. Near her boot lay the body of the rear guard, Petty Officer Davis. He wasn't moving. His eyes were open, staring at the flare-lit sky. His MK-18 carbine lay in the dirt. The ejection port cover open, a live round in the chamber. The stray vanished. The analyst vanished. Ilara reached out. Her hand didn't shake. She grabbed the pistol grip of the rifle and pulled it toward her. It was heavy, heavier than the pen she had wielded for the last decade, but it felt familiar, like an old limb she had forgotten she possessed. She pulled the charging handle back slightly, a press check. Brass glinted, loaded. She slapped the bolt forward and thumbed the selector switch from safe to semi. Knox looked up. He saw her. He saw the librarian holding the dead man's rifle. He opened his mouth to yell, to tell her to put it down, to tell her she was a liability. But the look in her eyes stopped him. The fear was gone. The pity was gone. There was only a cold, mathematical calculation. "Knox," she said. She didn't shout. The lull in the mortar fire carried her voice. The jammer is line of sight. It's on the north rim. She raised the rifle, buttstock snapping into her shoulder with a practiced ease that made Knox blink. We're going to kill it. The silence in the ravine was heavy, a suffocating blanket that smelled of sulfur and wet rock. The mortar fire had paused again. The enemy gunners adjusting their sights, tightening the bracket. They knew they had the SEALs trapped. Now they were taking their time, savoring the kill. Ilara moved through the dust, the dead man's rifle held low. She stepped over the legs of a shivering operator who was trying to repack a wound on his own arm. Chief Knox was standing over the radio telephone operator, RTO, his massive frame casting a shadow over the smaller man. Knox was vibrating with a frantic energy, his eyes darting from the canyon rim to the wounded lieutenant. "Get me anything!" Knox roared, his voice cracking. "I don't care if it's unsecure. Get me a frequency that works." "I'm trying, Chief," the RTO stammered, his fingers slipping on the dials. "It's broad-spectrum denial. They're hopping frequencies faster than the crypto can keep up. I can't punch through." Knox grabbed the handset from the kid's hand, keying the mic so hard the plastic groaned. Any station. This is Echo Lead. We are combat ineffective. I repeat, Echo 2 is fixed. Viper is down. We need immediate extract at Grid Sierra Tango." Static hissed back. Cold, mocking white noise. Ilara stopped beside them. She didn't look at Knox. She looked at the northern rim of the canyon, analyzing the jagged silhouette against the stars. "They aren't listening, Chief," Ilara said. Her voice was eerily flat, cutting through the panic like a razor. "And if you stay in this kill box for another 30 seconds, that mortar team will correct their azimuth. You'll all be dead." Knox spun around, wild-eyed. The stress of command, the failure of his tactics, and the impending death of his men had stripped away his professional veneer. He shoved past the medic, looming over her, his chest heaving. "I told you to shut up!" Knox screamed, spit flying. "You're a glorified librarian! You don't know what's happening here! Stay out of my sight, Stray!" He turned back to the radio, desperate to scream into the void again. Ilara didn't flinch. She checked her watch. 22 seconds until the next volley. "Knox," she said, her voice dropping an octave, hardening into something metallic. "The jamming signal is directional. It's coming from a localized emitter. Line of sight." Knox ignored her. "Mayday! Mayday! Any station!" Ilara stepped in. She didn't ask. She reached out and grabbed the cord of the handset, jerking it violently. The movement was so sudden, so uncharacteristically aggressive, that Knox froze. "The flanking maneuver they're using?" Ilara said, looking at the blood pooling near his boots. "It's a textbook L-shaped ambush, modified for urban terrain, page 142, subsection C." Knox stared at her, the handset dangling between them. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I wrote it," she whispered. The admission hung in the air, heavier than the smoke. "I wrote the protocol they are using to kill you. Now hand me the radio or your men die in 19 seconds. Knox blinked. For a moment, he looked like he was going to strike her. Then, he looked at Viper, bleeding out in the dirt. He looked at the terror in the eyes of his men. He let go of the handset. Ilara brought the mic to her lips. She didn't switch to the command frequency. She didn't try to call base. She switched the radio to scan, searching for the strongest signal source, the one dominating the spectrum. She found it. A high-power carrier wave on an unsecured band. The jamming frequency itself. "All stations," Ilara said into the mic, addressing her own team, her voice projecting clearly over the squad's internal loop. "Listen to me. Do not fire at the rim. You are wasting ammo." The SEALs looked up, confused. Who was giving orders? "RTO," Ilara snapped, pointing at the radio operator. "Triangulate the source of the interference. It's not on the ridge, it's on the spur. 300 meters. Azimuth 015. "How do you—" the RTO started. "Because that's where I would put it," Ilara interrupted. "It's the only spot with a direct line of sight into the ravine that is shielded from satellite thermal sweeps. It's a blind spot. Protocol Obsidian, Appendix F." She turned to the heavy weapons gunner, a burly man named Miller holding the MK-48 machine gun. "Miller," she commanded. "Do not fire at the muzzle flashes. I want you to traverse left. See the rock formation that looks like a split tooth? 10 o'clock high." Miller hesitated, looking at Knox. "Do it!" Knox barked, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a desperate hope. Miller swung the heavy gun barrel. "I have eyes on the split tooth." "There is a shadow at the base of that rock," Ilara said, her eyes closed, visualizing the terrain map she had studied hours ago, overlaying it with the tactical doctrine she had invented. "The jammer is sitting in that shadow. It is a soft target. Man-portable." "I can't see a target, ma'am," Miller said. "It's pitch black." "I am not asking you to see it," Ilara said, opening her eyes. "I am telling you it is there. Fire for effect. 500 rounds. Cyclic." Miller looked at the dark rock. It went against every instinct he had, to fire at a shadow when enemies were shooting at him from the right. He pulled the trigger. The MK-48 roared, a continuous belt of 7.62 millimeters hate pouring into the darkness of the split tooth. Tracers hammered the rock face, sparking and ricocheting. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, a secondary explosion blossomed in the dark. A sphere of blue-white electrical fire erupted at the base of the rock, followed by a shower of sparks. The jamming equipment's lithium batteries had detonated. Instantly, the white noise in their earpieces vanished, replaced by the clear, beautiful static of an open net. "Comms are up!" the RTO shouted, disbelief in his voice. "I have a signal! We are green!" Ilara lowered the handset. She didn't smile. She turned to Knox, who was staring at the burning wreckage of the jammer on the ridge, then back at her. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "You have comms, Chief?" Ilara said, handing the radio back to him. "Call the airstrike. You have 10 seconds. Grid marked. Danger close." Knox screamed into the handset, his voice raw. "I need fast movers on station now." The radio crackled with the calm, detached voice of a generic AWACS controller cruising at 30,000 feet. "Copy, Echo Lead. Assets are inbound. Time on station, 4 mics. Keep your heads down." 4 mics? Knox lowered the radio, staring at Ilara with disbelief. "We don't have 4 minutes. That mortar team is bracketed. The next volley is for effect." Ilara ignored him. She was watching the tracer fire from the northern rim. The geometry of the ambush was shifting. The enemy, realizing their jammer was gone and air support was imminent, would push to finish the fight before the jets arrived. They would squeeze the trigger. "We have to assault," Ilara said. She pointed not at the exit of the ravine, but directly up the southern scree slope, a steep, exposed face of loose shale that seemed to offer zero cover. "Are you insane?" Miller, the heavy gunner, spat. "That slope is wide open. If we move up that, we're silhouetted against the sky. They'll cut us to ribbons." "No," Ilara snapped, her voice cutting through the descent. "Look at the angle of the north rim. The machine gunners are positioned on the crest to fire down into the ravine floor. They can't depress their muzzles low enough to hit that slope without exposing themselves to our return fire. It's dead ground. It's a geometric blind spot. The SEALs looked at the slope. It went against every instinct drilled into them. Never run uphill into guns. It's called a defilade ascent, Ilara continued, her eyes locking with Knox's. I wrote it for mountain warfare in '09. The enemy is positioned to kill anything on the floor. If we go up, we move under their guns. A mortar round landed 50 meters away, closer than the last. The shockwave rattled the teeth of every man in the squad. Knox made the decision. It wasn't trust. It was the math of survival. On me! Knox roared, grabbing the drag handle of the litter carrying the unconscious Viper. We move! Miller, rear guard! Spray the north rim! Everyone else, hit the slope! Go, go! The platoon broke cover. It was a terrifying, lung-burning scramble. Ilara threw herself onto the shale, clawing her way up the 45-degree incline. Her boots slipped on the loose rock. She expected to feel the impact of a bullet at any second. Above them, the air snapped and hissed. Thousands of rounds tore through the space where their heads would have been if they were standing, impacting the far wall of the ravine. Snap, hiss. Snap, hiss. Miller was right. They were exposed. But Ilara was also right. The enemy gunners on the opposite ridge couldn't aim low enough. To hit the SEALs, the enemy had to lean over the edge of their cover. Contact left, Miller shouted, firing a burst from the hip as he scrambled backward. An enemy fighter had exposed himself on the north rim, trying to get an angle. Miller's burst cut him in half before he could fire. Keep moving, Ilara gasped, her lungs burning in the thin air. Don't stop. If you stop, you slide. They crested the lip of the southern ridge, rolling over the top into a cluster of jagged boulders. They collapsed, heaving for air, chests pounding against their armor. They were out of the ravine. They were out of the kill box. Status! Knox wheezed, checking Viper's pulse. All up. No leakers, Doc reported. They were alive. The stray had been right, but Ilara didn't rest. She pushed herself up, scanning their new position. They were now on the high ground, flanking the enemy force that was still focused on the empty ravine below. Miller, Ilara whispered, pointing across the gap to a cluster of rocks on the northern side where the muzzle flashes originated. You have enfilade. They are lined up behind that wall. They think we're still below them. Miller grinned, a feral, dirty expression. Payback. He set up the Mk-48 on a bipod. This time he didn't need to suppress. He had the enemy in a straight line, unaware they were being flanked. Light them up, Knox ordered. The Mk-48 roared. The result was catastrophic for the enemy. Caught in the open from the side, their cover was useless. The talking guns that had pinned the SEALs for an hour fell silent in seconds. Cease fire, Knox said after a long burst. Target neutralized. The silence returned to the Hindu Kush, but this time it was the silence of victory, not dread. Knox walked over to Ilara. She was sitting on a rock, cleaning the dust from her glasses. Her hands were trembling now, the adrenaline crash. You knew, Knox said. It wasn't a question. You knew exactly what angle they could shoot. I trained the unit that trained them, Ilara said softly. I know their limitations. Chief, Soto called out from the edge of the clearing. He was kneeling beside the body of an enemy spotter they had overrun during the flank. You need to see this. Ilara and Knox walked over. The dead man was young, maybe 20. He wore American-made tactical gear, mismatched but high quality. Soto pointed to the dead man's chest rig. A pouch was open, and a sheaf of papers had spilled out, stained with blood. Ilara knelt. She reached out and picked up the papers. Her breath hitched. It wasn't a map. It wasn't religious text. It was a photocopy. Grainy, third-generation quality, but unmistakable. It was a tactical diagram. Figure 4.2, L-shaped ambush in restrictive terrain. She turned the page. There were handwritten notes in the margins, in Arabic and in Russian, correcting the timing, refining the angles. That's a DevGru manual, Soto whispered. That's classified no foreign. Ilara stared at the page. At the bottom, in the footer, was a serialization code she recognized. It was her code, her draft, the one she had submitted to the Pentagon 5 years ago. They didn't just steal our tactics, Ilara said, her voice hollow. They are studying them. They are refining them. She looked up at Knox. The look of suspicion was gone from his face, replaced by a grim realization. We aren't fighting insurgents, Knox said. We're fighting a mirror. The position Echo Platoon occupied was a ruin of undetermined age. A crumbling stone watchtower clinging to the spine of the ridge. It offered a commanding view of the valley floor they had just escaped, but the wind up here was a physical assault, cutting through sweat-soaked combat shirts and chilling the blood. Set perimeter security, Knox ordered, his voice rasping. He sounded old. 12 to 6, utilize the rubble. I want claymores on the approaches. If a lizard sneezes, I want to know about it. The adrenaline of the assault was fading, replaced by the crushing weight of fatigue. The SEALs moved like automatons. Soto and Miller began rigging M18A1 claymore mines on the narrow goat path leading up to the ruins, positioning the clackers within easy reach of the sentry line. Ace report, Knox demanded, leaning against a graffitied wall. Green on ammo thanks to the flank, Miller grunted. Yellow on water. Red on meds. We used half the morphine on Viper. Viper lay in the center of the small enclosure, unconscious but stable, wrapped in a thermal blanket. The team was alive. They were defensible. But the mood was brittle. Ilara sat apart from them, near a jagged hole in the wall that served as a window. She was watching the dark valley below, her face illuminated intermittently by the distant flares still popping over the kill zone. She looked small in her oversized jacket, hugging her knees. Knox walked over to her. He didn't loom this time. He moved heavily, the papers found on the dead fighter crumpled in his fist. He dropped the blood-stained sheets onto the dirt in front of her. Start talking, Knox said. It wasn't a shout. It was a quiet, dangerous demand. Ilara didn't look at the papers. She knew what they said. We need to conserve heat, Chief. The temperature is dropping. Don't play the analyst with me. Knox crouched down, leveling his eyes with hers. I've been in the teams for 15 years. I know every tactical manual ever issued by the Center for Naval Analyses. I have never seen Protocol Obsidian. And yet, I just watched you execute a maneuver from it that saved my life. He jabbed a finger at the papers. And I just watched us kill a man who was carrying a copy of it with your serialization code. The other operators had stopped what they were doing. The silence in the ruin was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Who are you? Knox asked. Because you sure as hell aren't a cultural liaison. Ilara adjusted her glasses, the wire frames bent from the climb. She looked at the men, dirty, bleeding, scared, and looking at her for answers she didn't want to give. My name is Ilara Vance, she said softly. Before that, my clearance level was distinct. From 2008 to 2012, I was the senior tactical analyst for the asymmetric warfare group. I didn't just read the doctrine, Chief. I wrote it. A murmur went through the team. The asymmetric warfare group was a ghost unit, tasked with solving problems that didn't officially exist. Protocol Obsidian, Ilara continued, her voice steady but hollow. It was a study in urban denial and counterinsurgency escalation. It was designed to break the psychological will of a dug-in enemy. It was theoretical. Theoretical? Knox scoffed. Those guys down there aren't theoretical. They're using our own playbook against us. How did they get it? Ilara looked away, staring into the dark. The memory pushed to the surface. The smell of burning diesel, the screams in a Kabul safe house, the decision that had cost her everything, the ghost of Kabul incident. The reason she was astray now, pushing pencils instead of commanding operations. Data breach, she lied. It was a half-truth. 5 years ago, a server in Bahrain. They got the raw files. Why are you here then? Miller asked from the shadows. If you're some high-speed architect of war, why are you riding in the back of a Chinook with no gun? Because I messed up, Ilara whispered. And when you mess up at that level, they don't fire you. They bury you. They put you in a basement and tell you to check spelling errors on cultural briefs until you fade away. Knox studied her face. He saw the pain there, deep, sedimentary layers of guilt. He realized that the shoulder check he had given her earlier was nothing compared to the weight she carried every day. You saved us today, Knox said, his tone shifting. The hostility was gone, replaced by a grudging, confused respect. But if they have the manual, they know what we're going to do next, don't they? Yes, Ilara said. They know the standard extraction protocols. They know we'll go for the high ground. They know we'll wait for air. So what do? We throw the book away, Ilara said, looking back at him. We stop fighting like SEALs. We stop fighting like Americans. Before Knox could answer, the radio on his chest crackled. The jamming was gone, but the open channel was still active. The static hissed, and then that deep, resonant voice returned. The voice of the enemy commander. You are efficient, teacher, the voice said. Ilara froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. She grabbed Knox's wrist, stopping him from keying the mic. I saw the defilade ascent, the voice continued, smooth and terrifyingly intimate. Page 86, elegant. But you are old, Ilara. You are slowing down. Do you remember what you taught us about the pause? Knox looked at Ilara. Her face had gone pale, stripped of all color. He's not reading the manual, Ilara whispered, horror dawning in her eyes. He doesn't need the papers. Who is he? Knox hissed. He's not a stranger, Ilara said, her voice trembling for the first time. He's my student. The radio handset in Knox's hand felt like a live grenade. The voice emanating from it was calm, cultured, and terrifyingly familiar to Ilara. It didn't sound like a fanatic screaming slogans. It sounded like a professor giving a lecture. You are looking for a triangulation lock, aren't you, Chief? The voice said. Tell your RTO to stop. I am using a burst transmission encryption on a shifting subcarrier. By the time you isolate the packet, I will be on a different azimuth. Knox looked at the RTO. The kid was sweating, frantically tapping his tablet. He looked up and shook his head. He's right, Chief. The signal is ghosting. It's bouncing off the canyon walls. I can't pin him. Who is this? Knox barked into the mic. Identify yourself. Names are irrelevant in the dark, Chief Knox, the voice replied. But the teacher knows me. She remembers the classroom in the Panjshir Valley. She remembers the lesson on psychological dislocation. Ilara took the handset from Knox. Her hand was steady, but her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pressed the transmit button. "Hello, Malik," she said. The silence on the other end lasted for 3 seconds. When the voice returned, it was softer, laced with a dark amusement. "It has been a long time, Ilara. You sound tired?" Knox stared at her. "Malik? Who is Malik?" Ilara ignored him, keeping her eyes on the dark ridge line opposite them. "Malik was a local asset," she said to the team, though her words were for the man on the radio. 2011, we recruited him from a university in Peshawar. He was brilliant. We needed someone who could think like the enemy but operate like us. So I trained him." "You trained him?" Miller hissed, gripping his machine gun. "You taught this guy how to kill us?" "I taught him how to save his country," Ilara corrected, her voice brittle. "I taught him small unit tactics, encrypted comms, asymmetric warfare. I taught him everything I knew because I thought he was on our side." "I was on your side," Malik's voice cut in, sharp and sudden. "Until you left. Until the Americans pulled out and left us to the wolves. You gave us the doctrine, teacher, but you didn't give us the air support. So we adapted. We took the manual you wrote and we perfected it." A single red flare popped in the distance, hovering over the valley floor. It wasn't tactical. It was theatrical. Malik was showing them he controlled the lighting. "Status report, Ilara," Malik said. "Your lieutenant has a shattered femur. He is bleeding out. You are down to 3 magazines per man. You have no water. And your extraction birds are grounded due to weather, which is code for risk-averse command." The accuracy of the intel was chilling. He knew their ammo count. He knew the specific nature of Viper's wound. "How?" Knox whispered. "He's monitoring the physiological telemetry," Ilara realized, looking at the biomonitors on the SEAL's wrists. "He hacked the encrypted personal area network. He can see your heart rates. He knows you're scared." "Cut the feeds," Knox ordered. "Everyone, kill your comms Bluetooth. Go analog." The operators frantically disabled their digital uplinks, severing the invisible tether. "Smart," Malik said, "but too late. I know you are trapped on the ridge. I know you are waiting for the AC-130, but it won't get here in time, will it?" "What do you want, Malik?" Ilara asked. "If you wanted us dead, you would have mortared the ruins already. I want a trade." The wind howled through the broken stones of the watchtower. Knox stepped closer to Ilara, his body tense. "I have no interest in killing the SEALs," Malik continued. "They are just tools, blunt instruments. But you, Ilara, you are the architect. You are the one who codified the suffering of this valley into a PowerPoint presentation." "Get to the point," Ilara said. "Walk down the path," Malik said. "Unarmed, alone. Surrender yourself to my custody. Do that, and I will open the southern pass. I will let your team carry their wounded leader out. I will give them safe passage to the extraction zone." "Bullshit," Miller spat. "He'll kill us the second we step out." "I am a man of my word," Malik said. "Unlike your government, you have 5 minutes to decide. If you do not walk, I will assault the ridge. And I will not use suppression this time. I will use the thermobaric rockets I captured from the Russians." The radio clicked off. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of the ultimatum. The SEALs looked at each other, then at Ilara. The suspicion was back, but it was mixed with something else now. Desperation. He's bluffing, Knox said, though he didn't sound convinced. He doesn't have thermobarics. He does, Alara said quietly. I saw the burn marks on the valley floor earlier. He used them to clear the landing zone. If he hits this tower with a thermobaric warhead, the overpressure will liquefy your lungs before the building even collapses. She looked at Viper, who was shivering violently under the thermal blanket. She looked at the young faces of the team. They were elite warriors, but they were trapped in a scenario they couldn't shoot their way out of. He wants me, Alara said. He blames me for the abandonment of his unit 10 years ago. It's personal. We don't trade people, Knox growled. That's not how this works. We don't leave anyone behind. You aren't leaving me behind, Alara said, unbuckling her chest rig. She set the rifle down against the wall. I'm volunteering. No. Knox stepped in front of her. You are a civilian asset. You are under my protection. If I let you walk down there, I might as well put the gun in my mouth. If you don't let me walk, everyone dies, Alara said. She looked up at the giant of a man. You read the manual, Chief. Protocol Obsidian, Chapter 9. De-escalation through high-value asset exchange. I'm burning that damn book when we get home, Knox said. You have to get home first, Alara replied. She checked her watch. 4 minutes. She turned to the team. Listen to me. He expects me to surrender. He expects me to be the guilt-ridden bureaucrat trying to atone for the sins of the Empire. He expects me to be weak. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the hard drive, the one from the satellite. She held it up. But he forgot one thing, Alara said, her eyes hardening behind the dirty lenses of her glasses. I never finished teaching him the final lesson. Which is? Knox asked. The Trojan horse. The Trojan horse, Knox repeated, the wind whipping the words from his mouth. We aren't playing Greek mythology, Vance. We are talking about you walking into a firing squad. I'm talking about access, Alara said, her voice steady despite the cold gnawing at her extremities. She sat on the rubble, the heavy, ruggedized hard drive resting on her knees like a holy book. Malik wants two things. He wants me to validate his victory, and he wants this drive to sell to the highest bidder. That is his funding for the next decade. We don't negotiate with terrorists, Miller growled from his position at the window. It's a standing order. If we give you up, we are violating direct orders. You aren't giving me up, Alara corrected, pulling a small multi-tool from her pocket. She began unscrewing the casing of the hard drive. I am deploying myself as a munition. Knox knelt beside her, watching her hands work. They were precise, surgical. She wasn't trembling anymore. The fear had been replaced by the terrifying clarity of a woman who had already accepted her own death. Explain, Knox said. Malik is arrogant, Alara said, prying the casing open to reveal the glittering circuitry inside. He thinks he has surpassed me. That makes him vulnerable. If I walk down there, he will let his guard down to gloat. He will bring me to his command node. He will want to look me in the eye. And then he shoots you, Knox said. And then I trigger this. Alara tapped the exposed circuit board. This is a KH-11 data core. It has a tamper-proof self-destruct mechanism, a magnetic degausser powered by a capacitor. If I bridge these two contacts, it doesn't just wipe the data. It releases a short-range electromagnetic pulse strong enough to fry unshielded electronics within 5 meters. She looked up at Knox, including his comms, including the detonators for his thermobaric rockets. You want to EMP him? Knox asked, skepticism furrowing his brow. That's your plan? A localized blackout? It's not about the blackout, Ilara said softly. It's about the signal. She pointed to the satellite uplink on the drive. I can rig this to broadcast a specific squawk code the moment I bridge the contacts. A distress beacon on a dedicated NSA frequency. It overrides the jamming because it's a burst transmission, microseconds long. Knox realized what she was saying. You're painting the target. Exactly. The moment I trigger it, the AC-130 overhead will get a 10-digit grid coordinate. Not of the valley, not of the ridge, but of me. The silence that followed was heavy. The implications were clear. Ilara was proposing to walk into the enemy camp, hug the enemy commander, and call an airstrike onto her own head. No, Knox said, standing up. He looked away, staring at the dark outline of the mountains. I can't authorize that. It's suicide. It's calculus, Chief, Ilara said, her tone hardening. Malik is stalling. Look at the valley floor. Knox grabbed his binoculars. He scanned the darkness below. He gave us 5 minutes, Ilara said. Why? He has the manpower to overrun us now. He has the rockets. Why wait? Knox adjusted the focus. He saw movement near the base of the spur, shadows dragging heavy tubes into position. He's moving his teams, Knox whispered. He's setting up crossfire angles for the rockets. He's maneuvering, Ilara confirmed. The trade offer is a feint. He knows we will argue about it. He knows American soldiers are paralyzed by moral dilemmas. He is buying time to ensure that when he fires, there is no rock on this ridge left standing to hide behind. She stood up, clutching the drive. He isn't going to let you leave, Knox. Even if I surrender, he will kill you all. This is the only way to break his OODA loop. We have to do the one thing he doesn't think we will do. And what is that? Give him exactly what he wants. Ilara walked over to the edge of the ruin. The wind roared, tearing at her loose clothes. She looked small, fragile, and infinitely dangerous. I need a head start, Ilara said. 3 minutes. When I get to the bottom, I will signal. That is when you launch your assault. Not to escape, but to kill them while they are looking at me. Knox looked at his men. They were exhausted, bleeding, running on fumes. But they were looking at Ilara differently now. She wasn't the stray anymore. She was the point man. Chief, Miller said, his voice low. The thermobarics are almost set. If we don't move. Knox closed his eyes for a second, wrestling with the burden of command. Then he opened them. They were cold, hard flint. One condition, Knox said to Ilara. What? You don't trigger that beacon until you are clear of the blast radius. Ilara smiled, a sad, tired smile. She knew, and he knew, that there would be no clearing the blast radius. Copy that, Chief, she lied. She checked the drive one last time, ensuring the wires she had stripped were ready to be touched together. She zipped her jacket up to hide the device. Tell the boys to fix bayonets, Ilara whispered. It's going to get intimate. She stepped out of the ruins, into the open view of the valley, and raised her hands above her head. Malik! She screamed into the darkness, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. I'm coming down! Ilara walked down the scree slope, her hands raised, her silhouette stark against the backlit dust of the valley. Every step was a calculated performance. She stumbled. She let her shoulders slump. She projected the body language of a broken woman, a defeated bureaucrat surrendering to the inevitable. Behind her, in the ruins of the watchtower, Echo Platoon was executing the most difficult order of their careers. They were making noise. "I can't believe we're doing this," Soto grunted, smashing his rifle butt against a loose sheet of corrugated tin. Clang, clang. "Shut up and scream," Knox ordered, firing 3 rounds into the air. A chaotic, undisciplined burst that violated every noise discipline protocol in the manual. "Make them think we're falling apart," the SEALs began to shout, feigning a breakdown in command. They fired sporadic shots, argued loudly over the open radio channel, and banged gear against rock. To a disciplined ear, it sounded like a unit in full rout, panicked, leaderless, and combat ineffective. Down in the valley, the shadows detached themselves from the rocks. Malik's men. They moved with the precision Alara had taught them. They didn't rush. They bounded forward, checking their angles, drawn out by the spectacle of the American collapse. They believed what they were hearing because the manual said that when a unit loses its officer and its comms, it descends into chaos. Alara reached the valley floor. The wind here was still, heavy with the smell of sage and old death. "Stop," a voice commanded. Alara froze. 10 meters in front of her, a figure emerged from the darkness. He wore no helmet, just a shema wrapped loosely around his neck and a tactical vest over a local shalwar kameez. He held a suppressed carbine, but it was lowered. Malik. He looked older than she remembered. The boyish eagerness was gone, replaced by the hard, weathered lines of a warlord. "Teacher," Malik said, stepping closer. 2 of his guards flanked him, their weapons trained on Alara's chest. "I expected more fight from your Spartans up there. They sound like frightened children." "They are children, Malik," Alara said, her voice trembling, partially from the cold, partially from the act. "They're scared. Viper is dying. They just want to go home." Malik smiled. It was a cold, victorious expression. "And you? Do you want to go home?" "I want you to stop the rockets," Alara said, lowering her hands slowly to unzip her jacket. "Don't!" one of the guards shouted, raising his rifle. "It's just the drive," Alara said, pulling the ruggedized case from her coat. "You wanted the data. Here it is." Malik holstered his weapon and stepped forward. He reached out, his eyes locked on the prize. He was 5 meters away. 4. "You wrote the rules, Alara," Malik said softly, his hand brushing the casing. "Violence of action, surprise, speed. But you forgot the most important rule. Never trust the asset." "I didn't. Forget," Alara whispered. Her exposed wires on the back of the drive. "I rewrote it." Up on the ridge, the panic stopped instantly. "Drop!" Knox's voice roared over the valley. Alara threw herself backward into the dirt just as she bridged the contact wires. Zzz-it crack. There was no explosion, no fireball, just a sharp, electric snap and a wave of invisible pressure. The EMP pulse washed over them. Malik's headset squealed with a high-pitched feedback loop before dying. The night vision goggles of his guards flickered and went black. The electronic detonators on the thermobaric rockets, positioned 50 meters away, shorted out in a shower of sparks. "Now!" Alara screamed, rolling onto her stomach. The ridgeline erupted, but this wasn't the chaotic fire of before. This was the precise, synchronized hate of Echo Platoon. Miller's machine gun opened up, not at Malik, but at the rocket teams exposed by the EMP. The SEALs fired with terrifying accuracy, cutting down the confused enemy fighters who were struggling with dead optics. Malik stumbled back, blinded by the sudden loss of his tech. He looked at the drive in his hand, now a useless brick, and then at Alara. Rage twisted his face. He reached for his sidearm. Ilara scrambled back, clawing for her own pistol, but she was too slow. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy caliber rounds tore into the ground between them. Not from the ridge, from the sky. The roar of a rotor system beat the air into submission. An MH-60 Blackhawk helicopter surged over the canyon rim, banking hard, its minigun spinning up. The weather had cleared. The distress beacon Ilara had triggered for a split second before the EMP fried the drive had punched through to the pulsing AC-130 loitering high above, which had relayed the vector to the extraction bird. "Extract! Extract!" Knox shouted over the open air, sliding down the slope with the rest of the team. Malik looked at the helicopter, then at Ilara. He knew he had lost the initiative. He turned and sprinted into the darkness, vanishing into the rocks, just as the minigun turned the ground where he had stood into a geyser of dirt. "Get to the bird!" Knox grabbed Ilara by the harness, hauling her up. "Go! Go!" The team sprinted for the landing zone, a flat patch of gravel illuminated by the chopper's searchlight. They were 50 meters out. 40. Then the world exploded. An RPG fired from a secondary position high on the cliffs that had escaped the EMP slammed into the tail boom of the Blackhawk. The helicopter spun violently, the sound of tearing metal screaming over the engines. The pilot fought it, trying to stabilize, but the tail rotor was gone. "Wave off! Wave off!" the pilot screamed over the PA. The bird lurched away, smoking, abandoning the landing attempt to crash land further down the valley. Echo Platoon skidded to a halt, the wash of the departing, dying helicopter, blasting them with dust. They were alone, ideally positioned in the center of the open valley floor, with no air support, and Malik's surviving forces were already regrouping in the dark. Ilara stood panting, the empty drive casing at her feet. The trap had worked, but the exit had slammed shut. The rotor wash of the departing Blackhawk died away, leaving a silence that was heavier than the mountain air. The dust settled slowly, coating the faces of Echo Platoon in a ghostly gray powder. They stood in a loose circle in the center of the valley floor, completely exposed. "Status!" Knox barked, his voice sounding tinny in the vastness of the dark. "Winchester on primary," Miller yelled, dropping his empty machine gun and drawing his sidearm. "One mag left," Soto reported. "I'm dry." They were combat ineffective. The feint had worked, the EMP had worked, but the extraction had failed. Now the valley was waking up. From the shadows of the cliffs, muzzle flashes began to sparkle like fireflies. The enemy, realizing the Trojan horse had stung but not killed, was surging forward. They weren't using tactics anymore. They were swarming. "Defensive perimeter!" Knox roared, dragging Ilara down behind a shallow berm of gravel. "Fix bayonets. If you have a knife, get it out. We make them pay for every inch." Ilara huddled in the dirt. She could hear the chanting starting up in the dark, a rhythmic, terrifying sound of men who knew they had won. Bullets began to impact the gravel around them, kicking up sharp sprays of rock. She looked at the radio on Knox's chest. The green light was solid. The open channel was still active, clearing the way to the aircraft stacking up in the stratosphere above. "Knox," Ilara said. She didn't shout. She felt a strange, icy calm washing over her. "Give me the radio." "For what?" Knox grunted, firing 2 rounds from his pistol into the dark. "To say goodbye? To finish it." She reached over and took the handset. Knox didn't stop her. He was busy trying to keep Viper's head down as the incoming fire intensified. Ilara keyed the mic. "Slayer 1-1, this is Echo Lead. How copy?" The response was immediate. The voice of the pilot in the FA-18E Super Hornet orbiting at 20,000 feet was crisp, detached, and professional. Solid copy, Echo Lead. We see the abort on the helo. We are Winchester on precision munitions, but we still have the Mk-82s. Advise intent. Alara looked at the encroaching shadows. She could see them now. Running figures, hundreds of them, closing the distance. 50 meters. 40. Slayer, Alara said, her voice steady. I need a broken arrow on my position. Authorization code, Obsidian 00. Knox froze. He stopped firing. He turned his head slowly to look at her. Broken arrow was the code for a unit being overrun, requesting all available ordnance on their own coordinates. It was a suicide pact. Echo Lead. The pilot's voice cracked slightly, losing its robotic detachment. Confirm broken arrow? That is danger close. Repeat, danger close. We will be dropping dumb iron. Dispersion is 50 meters. We don't have 50 meters, Slayer, Alara said. The enemy is inside the wire. Drop it all. Wipe the grid. Alara, Knox whispered. It's the only way, Chief, she said, meeting his eyes. Malik is regrouping. If we die here, he recovers the drive fragments. He recovers the bodies. He wins. If we burn the grid, nothing survives. Knox looked at his men. They were fixing knives to their carbines, preparing to charge into a wall of bullets. They were already dead. This just made it count. Knox nodded. Once, a sharp, definitive movement. Do it, he rasped. Slayer, you are cleared hot, Alara said into the mic. Coordinates are, my voice. Drop on my signal. Copy, Echo Lead, the pilot said. Inbound. Time on target. 15 seconds. Godspeed. The radio went dead. Alara dropped the handset. She looked at the team. 15 seconds! She screamed, her voice tearing fast the exhaustion. Into the crater! The minigun crater! Move! It was illogical, seeking cover in a hole when the sky was about to fall. But the SEALs moved on instinct. They dragged Viper and themselves into the shallow depression carved by the Blackhawk's minigun minutes earlier. It was only 3 feet deep, a jagged scar in the earth. Get down! Mouths open! Knox yelled, covering Alara with his own body. Press into the dirt! Alara lay curled in the fetal position, the smell of Knox's sweat and blood filling her nose. She counted the seconds. 10. The chanting was louder now. Malik's men were screaming victory. 5. A high-pitched whine began to tear the sky apart. It wasn't the roar of an engine. It was the sound of air being displaced by 500 pounds of falling steel. 3. Alara closed her eyes. She didn't pray. She thought of the manual. She thought of the neat, orderly paragraphs she had written about air-to-ground integration. 1. The world turned white. The impact was not a sound. It was a physical erasure. The ground didn't shake. It liquefied. The overpressure waves slammed into them, compressing their chests, driving the air from their lungs. Heat, hotter than the surface of the sun, licked over the top of the crater. For a second, there was nothing but the sensation of being unmade. Then, the sound arrived, a roar so loud it bypassed the ears and vibrated the bones directly. The valley floor was lifted up and thrown into the sky. The world returned in pieces. First, the vibration, a deep tectonic shudder that rattled Alara's teeth. Then, the smell, pulverized rock, ozone, and the sickeningly sweet scent of cooked propellant. Finally, the sound, a high-pitched, screaming tinnitus that drowned out everything else. Alara coughed, expelling a plug of gray dust from her lungs. She tried to push herself up, but her left side refused to answer. A piece of shrapnel, or perhaps a rock thrown by the blast, had punched through the side of her tack vest, Her vision swam in nauseating circles. "Sound off!" The voice was muffled, as if coming from underwater. A heavy hand grabbed her shoulder, shaking her violently. "Vance! Sound off!" Ilara blinked, clearing the grit from her eyes. Chief Knox was hovering over her. His face was a mask of blood and soot, his helmet gone, revealing a gash along his hairline. But he was alive. "I'm here," Ilara croaked. Knox didn't smile. He grabbed her harness and hauled her into a sitting position against the wall of the crater. The valley floor around them was unrecognizable. It was a moonscape of smoking craters and glassed sand. The broken arrow had done its job. The chanting was gone. The enemy wave had been vaporized. "We have a window," Knox said, shouting to be heard over the ringing in their ears. "CSR is inbound. 2 minutes out. But we can't stay in this hole. The heat is cooking us." Ilara looked at her leg. It wasn't broken, but she couldn't feel her foot. The blast overpressure had done something to her nerves. She tried to stand and crumpled. "I can't," she whispered. "Leave me. Get Viper. Go." Knox looked at her. For a fleeting second, Ilara thought he might actually consider it. The pragmatic decision, the one Protocol Obsidian would suggest to save the unit speed. Instead, Knox holstered his pistol. He turned his back to her and dropped to one knee. "Grab on," he ordered. "Knox, I'm dead weight." "I said grab on, Stray," he roared. "We are leaving, all of us." Ilara reached up, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. Knox grabbed her legs, hoisting her onto his back in a fireman's carry. The sheer density of the man was like leaning against a concrete pillar. He stood up, grunting with the effort, carrying his own kit, his weapon, and her. "Miller, Soto, you have the LT," Knox commanded. "Move to the extraction point. Green smoke." The team scrambled out of the crater. The air was thick with lingering heat. As they crested the lip of the blast zone, the sound of rotors cut through the tinnitus. A Pavehawk rescue helicopter was flaring hard 50 meters away, its searchlight cutting through the dust. It couldn't land. The ground was too unstable from the bombing. A jungle penetrator hoist was already unwinding from the winch. "Go, go!" They moved through the haze, but the valley wasn't empty. From the charred rocks near the cliff face, the edge of the blast radius, a single muzzle flash sparked, then another. Survivors. Broken, burned, but still fighting. Crack thump. A bullet kicked up dirt near Soto's feet. "Contact right!" Miller screamed, turning to fire one-handed while supporting Viper's stretcher. "Ignore it!" Knox yelled, his breath hitching as he sprinted with Ilara, on his back. "Get to the line!" They reached the hoist. The PJ, pararescueman, on the wire was already clipping Viper in. "2 at a time!" the PJ screamed over the rotor wash. "We're taking fire! Hurry!" Miller and Soto clipped Viper to the hook and signaled for the lift. The cable went taut, whisking the wounded lieutenant into the sky. "You're next!" Knox slammed Ilara onto the ground beneath the hovering bird. He grabbed the jungle penetrator seat that came back down, strapping her in with frantic, clumsy fingers. "Get on with me!" Ilara shouted, grabbing his vest. "There's room." "Negative! Weight limit!" Knox lied. Ilara knew the specs of the winch. It could take both of them. He was staying on the ground to cover her ascent. "Knox, don't be a hero! Shut up and ride!" Knox slapped the release. "Hoist! Hoist!" The cable tightened. Ilara's feet left the ground. At that moment, a figure emerged from the smoke, 30 meters away. It was Malik. Half his face was burned, his clothes ragged, but he raised a rifle, aiming not at the soldiers on the ground, but at the woman rising into the air. He wanted the architect. Knox saw him. He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't have time. As Ilara spun slowly on the wire, 10 feet in the air, exposed and helpless, Knox stepped directly into the line of fire. He expanded his silhouette, making himself a wall between the gun and the girl. Thwack! The bullet hit Knox in the upper chest, spinning him around. He dropped to one knee, gasping. "Knox!" Ilara screamed, reaching down as she rose higher. Knox didn't fall. He planted a boot, fighting gravity, fighting the shock. He raised his own rifle, leveling it at the shadow in the smoke. Bang, bang, double tap, center mass. Malik crumpled backward into the dust, his war finally over. Knox looked up. Blood was bubbling from his lips, dark and frothy. He looked at Ilara, now 30 feet up, safe in the arms of the PJ. He raised a shaking hand and tapped his shoulder, the same shoulder he had used to check her into the wall 12 hours ago. "I carried you," the gesture said. "We are even." "Get him!" Ilara screamed at the crew chief as she was hauled into the cabin. "Send the hook back down! Get him!" The Pavehawk banked hard, the miniguns opening up to suppress the remaining shooters. The hook dropped one last time, swinging wildly in the wind. Miller grabbed Knox, clipping the chief onto the line just as his legs gave out. As the helicopter peeled away, climbing steeply out of the valley of death, Ilara crawled across the diamond plate floor to where Knox lay gasping. She put her hands on his chest, trying to seal the hole. "You idiot," she sobbed, the tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. "You stubborn, arrogant idiot." Knox looked at her. His eyes were glazing over, but a faint, bloody grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Told you," he wheezed. "Die weight limit." 72 hours later, Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, Germany. The hospital room was sterile, white, and aggressively quiet. It smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, the smell of safety, which felt alien after the smell of burning mountains. Ilara Vance sat in a plastic chair next to the bed. Her arm was in a sling, and a butterfly bandage closed the cut on her cheek. On the bed, Master Chief Knox lay connected to a constellation of tubes and monitors. His chest rose and fell with the rhythmic hiss of a ventilator, but his eyes were open. They were tired, drugged, but lucid. The door opened. A Navy captain in dress blues walked in, followed by 2 men in dark suits who didn't introduce themselves. CIA. Or perhaps something deeper. "Ms. Vance," the captain said, his voice stiff. "We need a moment with the chief, and then we need to debrief you. The Oversight Committee is concerned about the methodology used in the Wakan." Ilara didn't stand up. She didn't salute. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick, plastic-bound document. It was the after-action report, AAR. She had spent the last 12 hours typing with one hand. "There will be no debrief," Ilara said. Her voice was quiet, but it had the same steel that had ordered an airstrike on herself. The suit on the left stepped forward. "Ms. Vance, you authorized a broken arrow on a classified operation. You utilized a civilian override code. You destroyed a KH-11 payload. You have a lot of questions to answer." "Read the report," Ilara said, sliding the file across the bedside table. The captain picked it up. He flipped to the summary page. He frowned. This says that Chief Knox identified the ambush pattern," the captain read. "It says Echo Platoon executed a counterinsurgency maneuver based on field improvisation. It says the hard drive was destroyed by enemy fire during extraction." Ilara looked at Knox. The chief was watching her, his brow furrowed in confusion. It doesn't mention Protocol Obsidian, the captain said, looking up. It doesn't mention you taking command. I was an observer, Alara said. I carried a bag. I got in the way. The men of Echo Platoon did the fighting. They did the thinking. If we file this, the suit said, you get nothing. No commendation. No recognition. You go back to the basement, Miss Vance. You remain a ghost. I like the basement, Alara said. It's quiet. She stood up, smoothing her mismatched fatigues. She looked at Knox. The manual, she said to him, is flawed. Chapter 6 needs a rewrite. You can't calculate for the human element. You can't codify stubbornness. Knox tried to speak, fighting the tube. He raised his hand, the one not tethered to an IV, and extended a fist. Alara hesitated. Then she reached out and bumped her knuckles against his. A dab. A seal. Get well, Chief, she said. Try not to shoulder-check the nurses. She walked, past the officers, past the suits, and out into the hallway. She didn't look back. She walked out of the hospital and into the gray German afternoon. She was invisible again. Just a middle-aged woman in bad clothes, walking with a slight limp. No one looked at her. No one saw the soldier. In her pocket, she felt the weight of a lighter. She stopped by a trash can. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, the only page of Protocol Obsidian she had kept, the page on asset expendability. She flicked the lighter. The flame caught the edge of the paper. She watched it curl into black ash, carried away by the wind. Alara Vance turned up her collar and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. File closed.